Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
Paige, welcome to Below the Line. I am here with Ms. Paige Stephenson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Way of the Piedmont. And Paige, thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to spend some time with me on Below the Line.
Great. Well, I appreciate the invitation. Honored to be here with you this afternoon.
I must confess that Paige is one of the first persons I met when I came to USC Upstate, and one of the first boards that I got on to help not only the mission of the United Way of the Piedmont, but also to engage and get to know people in the community. So for that, thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate it. So I'd like to start from the beginning. Can you tell me a little about where you grew up, what your upbringing was like, and why you moved to Spartanburg in 1993.
Yeah.
And what drew you to your career in service?
So I grew up in Monroe County, Alabama.
Okay.
So that is right down close to the coast, about an hour and a half from that. The claim to fame for that county is that's the birthplace and home of the now late Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. I grew up in a very rural area of that county. My closest neighbors were family members, and they were a mile away. My dad was a farmer.
Okay.
My mom was a school teacher.
Okay.
Pretty much had the idyllic country upbringing with lots of outdoor activities and animals, and loved to read, and so spent a lot of time in books. But from that from those early engagements in high school and on into college, volunteerism was a real key piece for me. And so when I went off to the University of Alabama, stayed engaged in that arena. That's where I met my husband. He was working on his PhD in chemistry, and whenever he finished up, his job offer was here in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Okay.
And the rest is sort of history. He went to work with Milliken, and that's how we ended up here.
Okay, excellent. What type of farming did your father do?
So he did cattle, and then he also did row crop with soybeans, cotton, corn, and wheat.
Okay, so we have that in common.
Okay.
We have a small farm in Mississippi, and we did cotton, soybean, wheat. We kind of rotate those crops. Did the soybean to put the nutrition back into the ground. So I didn't realize you came from those. Oh, great. We have a lot to talk about later.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about your career. How did that inspire your career in public service?
So going back to my family, my parents, even though we were far, far away from the action, they were both very involved in things outside of our community with boards and civic clubs and those types of things. And so that was just modeled for me from a very early age. And so whenever I got to Spartanburg, I worked with Young Office. Tommy Young hired me, and he gave me an opportunity very early on to participate in Leadership Spartanburg.
Okay.
And that really helped me get connected in with the community and start my volunteerism here. And that ultimately led to me, after 7 years there, going, I want to do something a little different. And I became what I called an accidental fundraiser.
Okay.
I sort of fell into that because I had grown to love the Spartanburg community and wanted to see it move forward.
So tell me, what was your initial reaction when you were offered the job in the position of President and CEO of the United Way of the Piedmont after 9 years with the United Way in that capacity? What did it mean to you to be in the organization?
Well, I was very honored to have been selected. my pathway into into the CEO position was not your usual pathway. I had actually applied for the job when one of my former colleagues, Chris Steed, whenever he exited.
Okay.
So that was in June of 2014. I made the decision to throw my hat in the ring. I was unsuccessful, but that was really quite the blessing because prior to that time, I had not been necessarily observing what Chris was doing, and did I agree with how he was making decisions, those kinds of things. And so when someone else was put into that position, it gave me the opportunity to really think through,
Right.
Is that the way I would have approached that? What would I have done differently? And so when he exited in November of 2015, an interim was brought in, and they did not reopen the search. They just did a search process on me.
Well, they had vetted you a year or so ago, right?
So they had watched how I had handled the prior 14 months, and then just brought in a search firm who talked to corporate leaders, talked to our major donors, and talked to our community partners, and then they came and made me the offer.
Well, I think they made a great choice.
Oh, well, thank
I've had
you.
the chance to participate with you and to work with you, and I think they made an excellent choice. So there are some very specific initiatives and campaigns that you have launched over your career with the United Way of the Piedmont. So what are your vision for expanding the next year, this upcoming year?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have launched earlier this year and sort of shoved it out of the nest, and that is a place to call home. So United Way had been convening that work around homelessness and housing for quite some time, since prior to COVID. And so just really looking forward to continuing to build on that work because we are one of the major partners at the table, and homelessness and housing are key pieces when we're thinking about financial security for those in our community. Another area that I'm really excited about in the next year is with Union Uplifted. So because of the work with Spartanburg academic movement here in Spartanburg County, and the external investments that were being made here, that attracted BlackRock Foundation to make an investment in Union. And so as part of that 2-year planning process, and we're a little over halfway through that planning process, we've had a team member who's been boots on the ground to help build those relationships, facilitate things so that as one of the other national partners, Partners for Rural Impact has been coming in, that we're sort of working hand in glove. And so I'm just excited to see where that heads.
Now, talk to me about the area that is considered the Piedmont. This is the magazine that it will be shared as a statewide magazine. So give our audience a landscape with the Piedmont.
So for us, we cover Spartanburg, Union, and Cherokee counties.
3-county region.
A 3-county region. And so as we're approaching those 3 counties, very distinct personalities, different resources, different players. But one of the great things is that we're able to take the learnings from one particular community and then see how we can do what I call R&D, rip off and deploy.
Okay. I like that.
So that it fits, if that particular need is there. We've got a little bit of a blueprint to take in and to tweak and see what's going to make the best sense for that particular community.
Now, one of the things I see with the United Way of the Piedmont, and and the area counties that there's a lot of collaboration among nonprofit and organizations and the community here in Spartanburg County and some of the area. What do you attribute that type of partnership and collaboration? And I see you convening a lot of organizations and leaders.
So all of that collaborative work is really anchored in trust.
Yeah.
Whenever I look specifically like in Spartanburg County, many of us have really grown up, especially in the philanthropic space, in our organizations. We've been here for quite a while. And because of our close working relationship, that has just allowed us to do some bigger things and to look at those opportunities that might be more collaborative in nature. Also, I always look back at COVID, and the silver lining from COVID is the fact that Chris Story, Spartanburg city manager, was like, you know what? We're all dealing with the same thing. None of us really know what's going to be happening around the corner. And so every Friday morning at 10 o'clock, we hopped on a Zoom call, and some weeks it was, hey, how are you handling this particular thing? Other weeks it was more of a therapy session. Then other weeks it was really looking beyond the immediacy of the things that needed to be addressed. And it was the philanthropic community, but also healthcare, government, business, education, all at the table,
I
figuring
think
out.
COVID, for many communities, and I think Spartanburg County did differently, leverage these a crisis to become better and to see where the gaps are and how we can mitigate that in the future and how all boats can really be lifted and participate.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's unfortunate when a crisis like these occur and a community don't learn from them and they don't grow from them as well.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to something you talked about, one of your priorities. How pervasive is the homeless population here and housing insecurity population? Because around there's so much building going on.
Yeah.
So how pervasive is that?
So when you look at homelessness, there's actually a book of the title, Homelessness is a Housing Issue.
Okay.
Because when you stop and think about it, it requires a built environment throughout the continuum. So obviously if somebody is on the street and they're homeless,
Right.
the first thing that we need is shelter beds.
Yeah.
Then you need transitional housing, and it moves forward there. And what we have seen in Spartanburg is there's a lot of growth in particular areas of the housing continuum, but not all along that continuum. Right. And so one of the things that has just happened in the past 2 months, I believe now, is we finally have a family shelter for homeless families that is back in the mix.
That's important.
Very important.
Okay.
Because we only have one emergency shelter in Spartanburg, and so it is geared more toward single men. They have more beds for them. The other portion, it's women and children.
Okay.
But it's not quite as expansive.
Right.
There are some sheltering opportunities for particular populations, like veterans or folks who are in substance abuse recovery or domestic violence victims, but just for the general public.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, too, that we have seen and that was really elevated during COVID is that people see what they traditionally think of as homeless, maybe out on the street. The majority of the homeless in our communities are not those individuals. They are the hidden homeless. They are the families who are living in hotels.
Right.
So, they have shelter, but it is not stable, permanent shelter.
And that
it's,
has a ripple effect on the kids and
Absolutely.
schools and being able to follow their success.
Yes. And that was one of the things during COVID that we saw is all of a sudden, because work stopped, there were people who were in a stable situation, able to make ends meet, but their housing was a hotel.
Yeah.
And when their job stopped, they, then that put them in jeopardy of being evicted from the hotel.
And then with inadequate public transportation, having affordable housing downtown is where most of the jobs are, is really even a difficult situation. So you've built strong relationships within the organization and the community. And so how do you plan to deepen and leverage those relationships to further the United Way of the Piedmont?
Yeah. Well, relationship building is the key. And that is, it's not like, whoop, we've built that relationship now, we're done. I can move on to the next one. It is that continued conversation with people, listening to what it is that they have happening, what are their particular needs. And when I'm talking about that, that's not just from an individual perspective in the community that our whole team is doing, but really looking at those opportunities at an organizational level and being able to fill those gaps with one another. And so when I think about just the work that we have going on right now, we've got another new collaborative that will be launching around mental and behavioral health. And I'm super excited about that. That's going to, I think, the different parts of that are going to have tremendous impact in our community. But also, whenever we've had external organizations and people who have looked at what we're trying to accomplish here in Spartanburg, they have been so encouraging and complimentary. They're like, oh, well, we've seen one community who maybe has done this piece well, but we've never seen a community look at this in a comprehensive fashion and how it all interconnected, and then trying to move that work forward. So building some of those relationships.
It is very special. And I think the fact that many of the CEOs and those who lead nonprofits around Spartanburg County and the area, in the upstate particularly, are very collaborative, have a lot of respect for each other. The business community is a big partner. So how can others get involved in the United Way of the Piedmont other than financial? I know people think about the United Way campaign, the organization, those types of things, but what are some other ways folks can get involved?
So one of the, a great program that we do is VITA, stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. Now for the non-numbers people out there, you might go, oh no, I can't be participating in volunteering in a program like that. I'm here to tell you there are several folks who were English and history majors that became tax preparers for us. They go through a training. But even if that's not something someone wants to do, there are multiple other jobs that have to be done. We've got to have volunteers there to welcome people as they're coming in at the clinic for their tax appointments. This past year, because we had an AmeriCorps NCCC team who came into town, who helped build our capacity around doing more tax returns. We were able to do 300 more tax returns this year than the prior year. So we hit just over 2,300. And really and truly, the only thing that holds that program back is the need for more volunteers.
True.
And when you stop and think about it, this particular program is targeting households with household incomes of $60,000 and below.
Okay.
But most of the families that we are working with are maybe they're elderly, and they are on a very, very fixed income. But most of those who are coming through are in that $25,000 to maybe $30,000 total household income. So when you begin to stop and think about what that means for them, just from a tax preparation cost savings, that's saving them on average $200 to $250 a year.
And that's a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a lot of money for them.
Yeah. So, but then there are other things as far as like signing up for our newsletter and participating in our signature projects that happen on a quarterly basis. We, come MLK Day, it's a day on, not a day off at United Way. And so we're coordinating volunteer projects across our community.
So where would they find out how to get go to your website?
Yes, just go to our website, uwpiedmont.org, and you'll have that information that's located there.
So let's talk about leadership. This is a leadership podcast, and I think everything we do really is about leadership. And you have exuded some great leadership throughout the community in your tenure at the United Way. So what leadership qualities do you think are important in a leader of a nonprofit or even any organization, particularly nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, I think that it is common across the board. I think at this point in time, especially resiliency, adaptability. I also think that transparency is key, because if you want to retain good employees, recruit good employees, they need to feel like that they can see all the way through what's happening in the organization. Being able to build relationships, because I do think that is critical, to know who your team members are and a little bit about them personally, and then just being authentic in those relationships.
Now, interestingly, everything you said are things that I've observed with you. So is that a blueprint? I do like how you have how you support your employees and you put your employees out front so that they can grow and you expose their gifts and talent and their contribution to the organization. And many leaders don't do that. Many leaders are afraid of having their subordinates be seen as being doing a great job.
If it's the typical mantra of, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. I feel like that as we're bringing people onto our team, if they don't have different skill sets that are stronger in areas where I'm not as strong, I mean, why am I bringing them on?
Right.
Especially when you're looking at your leadership team. It shouldn't be a lot of people who look exactly the same and think exactly the same. You really need to have those different life experiences as well as those professional experiences, because I just think it makes for richer conversation and discussion as you're going forward.
So let's talk about what this podcast is titled, called Below the Line. And we coined that phrase. I'd heard it before, and we coined that phrase for this podcast because I often see that leadership is just that. You don't always know what's going on below the line with the people you lead or the systems you lead sometime. How do you lead a successful team when you don't always know what's on the table? You may think you're negotiating one conversation, but there's a whole other.
Exactly. I think that being very open and honest. So I'm thinking about like from an internal team standpoint. I think it's really important for me to talk about, here are the times that I have screwed things up, and this is how I've learned from that, and this is how I proceeded from that.
Right.
And I think what that has done from an internal perspective is that has helped people understand that nobody's perfect. Mistakes are going to be made. The thing that we have to do is to talk about them, learn from them, create, the next steps so that we don't revisit that.
Yeah.
And I think that vulnerability with folks is key there. And also, whenever you have those situations where you're like, there is something else, there is some kind of subtext going on here, is just being forthright.
Yeah.
And having that conversation with that other person, partner, community partner, board member,
Right.
Help me understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
I feel like we're trying to move in step in one direction, but I feel like there's something else that you're not sharing with me that we need to talk about so that we can get a good path
And I think
forward.
sometimes just that level of transparency and conversation and vulnerability and even humility invites people to trust and to expose what they're holding on to that's impacting their ability to move forward.
Well, and like you said, from the humility perspective, maybe there are those instances where what needs to be said is, I feel like maybe I've done something that has created some separation for us. Is there something that I need to be aware of?
Yeah.
And really pulling it back on yourself. And I guess a piece of that comes from fundraising.
Yes.
In that, I can think back to some times where, the customer isn't always right because they're human as well. And there were times where it was like, it does not matter
Right.
at this point who's right, who's wrong, whatever. You just...
Or who gets the credit.
Exactly.
Just
You
about,
just-
yeah.
You have to just really step back and say, okay, where is it that I'm wanting to go with this? This requires me to apologize or do something that maybe I wouldn't ordinarily do in a particular situation. Nothing illegal, immoral.
Oh, definitely.
But maybe not your traditional pathway with something to go, okay, this relationship is key and important, and I want to make sure that it moves forward in a positive fashion.
So tell me, do you have a hero? And before you answer that, who had been some of your bigger influences in your leadership journey?
Yeah.
And what have they taught you?
So those that have been a big part of my leadership journey, and I think specifically once I got to United Way, because this month I celebrate 24 years.
Okay.
So I would say Kathy Dunleavy, who she was the CEO who came in a year and a half after I had joined United Way. And just her determination, her perseverance, her relentless focus on things really set a tone for me and helped guide me. Okay. And she's still somebody from a sounding board perspective. And then a second person would be Mary Helen Wade.
Okay.
And so Mary Helen had worked with Russell Reynolds, executive search firm. She was on our board at United Way before I moved into the CEO role. She was actually on the search committee the first time around when I did not get selected, and then she chaired the search committee whenever I was selected. And her mentorship and just her belief in what I could do was also very inspiring. And then I would say Lori McMillan, who's with Spartanburg Regional. She's over professional services. And she was my first female board chair.
Okay.
And it was during COVID. And so just her calm, response to things, her insights from a healthcare perspective were really important during that time, when you're going, what the heck should we be doing right now?
Yeah.
And so she was able to provide that, but also just looking at another female leader who had been extremely succul in her career path.
Yeah, that's important.
Absolutely.
Very important. So among those or someone else, how would you classify or categorize a hero for you?
So, I've thought about that question before, and I really do not have one singular person. There are bits and pieces at different points in my life where I feel like somebody was an extremely strong influence at that point in time. But there's nobody that I would say that I've put up on a pedestal that I look up to in all situations because, once again, we're all flawed.
Yeah, and all situations are situational.
Exactly.
So tell me this, do you have a mantra or a quote that you like?
So,
and what is it?
Yes. Yeah. So, whenever I think about it in the leadership format, I think be empathetic, be authentic.
Okay.
And those are the two things that I have found that have served me well. Leading a nonprofit organization that is centered on people. I think coming into that with empathy is critically important, because when this work becomes numbers and not people, then it's time for me to leave. Yeah. And then that empathy from my team member perspective, because especially for those who are in those more frontline positions, understanding that they are taking on a different mental, psychological load than those of us who aren't in those positions. Right. And then being authentic when you show up, because I think that allows other people to show up in that fashion. Yeah. And you're just going to have a much more effective team when people are showing up in an authentic way.
And I appreciate that. I see that. I see all of that in you, and I see consistency. Oh. I know who I'm going to get when I come and visit with Paige Stephenson. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to get someone yesterday and someone different today. I know who I'm going to get. I'm going to get that authentic, empathetic, kind, strategic, and thoughtful leader in person. So,
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paige, for joining me on Below the Line. This has been an exceptional time spent with you, getting to know you, a little about your background. I've learned some things that I did not know, and I appreciate you sharing your leadership paradigm with me and our audience today. So
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.